Grace to you and peace from God our Father and our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. How many of you have a nativity scene at your home? In just a second, we're going to have the slides for the sermon come up, and I'm going to show you our particular nativity scene that we have at our house. It's a nativity scene that I actually found at a garage sale a couple of years back, and it's the very same nativity scene that I had in our house when we were growing up, with a few exceptions. In this nativity scene, there are more characters than we had in our home, and the legs to the camel are not broken, which I blame to my little sister, who used to use the camels to play with horses when we were growing up. My friend Eric, who I graduated from seminary with, had this really good idea. He thought it would be kind of fun every Christmas to give a new nativity scene to his family so that they would build his collection. So just a couple of weeks ago, I called him up. Now this has been 30 years ago. I called him up. I said, hey, tell me, how is that nativity scene collection looking in your house? He said, oh, Brian. I said, what a mistake. He said, we have nativity scenes all over the house. I am so happy that I didn't have that bright idea at that same time. Nativity scenes. They're also called creches. And they first appeared in the Middle Ages, and we attribute the first nativity scene to St. Francis of Assisi. And in those days, they used live characters, so real donkeys and real sheep and real shepherds and a Mary and a Joseph and a real baby in the manger. And they would do this to tell the story about the birth of Jesus. And then over years, things changed a little bit. It started kind of with the wealthy people, but then the churches adopted it by just making figurines and setting those in the corner, again, to tell the story of the birth of Jesus. And now people everywhere seem to have these scenes. And even non-believing people. Later tonight, we walked by a store this past week in the most incredible location down in Newport Beach of all locations, and they had a nativity scene right in their windows. So these nativity scenes are rather nostalgic, and they're serene as well. But you can play around with them, like in our home. Every once in a while, it isn't unusual to see the nativity scene to be rearranged and new characters being added. Who would have thought Frosty the Snowman was at the nativity scene? And then in our collection, in our characters, there are two characters that I've never seen before. I have no idea who those guys are and what they're doing at the nativity scene, but we include them every year. But there are a couple of problems with nativity scenes. The first problem is with these guys. We heard about them in our reading just a few moments ago from the Gospel of Matthew. Our Bible calls them wise men. They were not there when Jesus was born. They would not have bumped into the shepherds. They would not have been at the crib side of Jesus. Matthew tells us that they were at the house, not the manger, but the house where Jesus was and the Holy Family were living. And given that King Herod wanted to kill all male babies 2 years old and younger, the assumption is that they showed up when Jesus was about 2 years old. He'd been walking by that time, talking even. And as far as I can tell, I've never seen any walking or talking Jesuses in anybody's manger scenes. But there are other problems too. We have no idea how many of these people there were. Matthew is silent on that. We only know that there was more than one. There could have been 2, or 3, or 33. We just don't know. People have, of course, assumed there were 3 because of the gifts that were given, which in my book are the worst gifts ever given to a 2-year-old for his birthday. But the last problem we have is what to call them. Somewhere in our history, someone said that they were kings, and somebody else wrote a song about that, which simply simply by title alone, We Three Kings, is completely misleading. They weren't kings. Someone else, like our Bible translators, called them wise men. And I'm not sure where in history we began to refer to them as wise men. From my book again, not very wise. Why? Well, they had to stop and ask for directions to begin with. And then again, there were those awfully foolish gifts they gave. The Greek word for these guys is magi, as in magicians, as in people who believe in elemental spirits and the reading of tea leaves, and the foretelling of future by looking at the lines in the palms of your hands, or by looking at the astrological signs in the sky. And that's exactly what they were doing. They were watching the stars. When all of a sudden a peculiar star showed up they hadn't seen before, and they believed that the star was an omen from the gods that something special had taken place. So, and this is a big deal, and so these visitors from the east who show up to visit the Holy Family are pagans. They are not believers. They are not Jewish. Pagans. And we have no idea what this moment meant to them, whether or not it had a life-transforming experience for them. And the second thing that we know, and this is probably even bigger, is that they tipped off King Herod, himself a Jew. They tipped off King Herod that there was now a rival born into this world who would compete with Herod for the crown. Who then, Herod, went about the baby hunt to eliminate all competition in killing these boys. These wise men, these magi, were indirectly responsible for the death of baby boys. All of which is to say that if we're going to put figurines into nativity scenes that really don't belong there, well, then maybe we ought to add King Herod in that scene. I mean, he plays a really important role, even though he never visited the Holy Family. You know, Christians oftentimes say to the world at this time of the year, remember to keep Christ in Christmas. I get that. But maybe you ought to keep Herod in Christmas as well. Why would I say that? Because we cannot, even for a moment, reduce the story of Jesus' birth as something that is romantic, idealistic, homey, or even a spiritual personal experience. Jesus' birth was neither clean nor sterile, and the time of his birth into this world was neither peaceful or serene. The effort that we make to create this well-organized, all-inclusive nativity scene, I think, can be rather naive. Having witnessed now in my life at least 2 births into this world, I cannot help but believe that in that manger there was screaming and wailing and promises never to do this again. And those were just things that I said, and I would imagine Joseph said. Mary probably was a lot more expressive. And if you think Mary was ecstatic about welcoming shepherds and sheep and cows and magi in her home, I suspect it was something different than that. And as an aside, you know, modern hymn writers have now added a drummer boy to the scene. I'm pretty sure that Mary would have had that drummer boy shot, regardless of how well he played. But the world was a mess too. How else can you explain this despot ruler by the name of Herod? Herod, who was so fearful that when he died, had all of his competitors killed, along with his own sons, so that all Judea would mourn the day that Herod died. That kind of butchery was not uncommon in those days. Human life was cheap. There were no such things as human rights. And I sort of think that that's the point to Christmas for us as well. I mean, you realize, as we sit here today, there are places in this world where human life remains to be very cheap, and where human rights are completely disregarded. Our family was on a vacation this past week down south, and it gave me a chance to do something that I absolutely love when I go to Southern California. Read the Los Angeles Times. That's an amazing newspaper. That reporting staff is not only global, but the time and work that they put into telling their stories is just simply amazing. And this week they carried an article on the civil war in South Sudan. 4.6 million people face severe hunger there. The fear of famine and genocide is so great that 7,000 people a day flee from their homes and become immigrants, running away to neighboring Uganda to find refuge. The country has an inflation rate of 835% per year. The hope of a better world, of a serene, peaceful world, seems totally out of reach. That's only one story. Every day in the Times, there are other stories, each telling the stories about human suffering, human neglect, and human death. Some of those stories are about developing countries, but a lot of them also about life here in the United States. It's easy to tune that stuff out. I read those articles, and part of me wanted just to block out the realities and to be warm and cozy and comfortable. But as you know, as a person of faith, we're not given that option. Jesus does not let us live in a state of denial. I suppose we need not look very far as a church family to challenge the notion of a peaceful nativity and a peaceful world. With Betty Wagner's death on the day before Christmas Eve and Mike's continued hospitalization, we have been awakened to the reality that accidents happen and that people die, and that because of that, many people suffer. It is a reality, isn't it? Just the day before that accident, I was mentioning to Patty Andrews, our church manager, church office manager, that upon looking at the records of our church over 2016, it was the second most number of funerals we have done as a congregation by one. And then Betty's death just sort of put an exclamation point onto that reality. And that is a reality, I need to say, that I have been struggling with for over a year. The rate of death and disappointment and discouragement, both personally and professionally, have taken its toll on me. And as I have written to the church membership this past week, I've requested a sabbatical in order to regain just a sense of God's presence in my life. So for the month of January, I will be away. A pastor friend of mine calls this occupational fatigue. My pastoral counselor calls this chronic grief. And so for the month of January, just simply to recharge my soul, to hear deeper the desires of God, I do plan, however, to be involved in the further planning for Betty's service and officiating that service when it takes place. All of which is to say why this text for this Sunday is so deeply important. Nativity scenes full of a cast of biblical characters might be comforting, but it does not make sense in the world in which we live. And if we allow sentimentality or biblical illiteracy to dominate this time of the year, you know, our worst problem isn't putting three kings along with holy shepherds and family. It's not putting Herod there. Because by putting Herod in that nativity scene, we are telling the fuller story. And what is the fuller story? Simply this: that God slipped into the vulnerability of human skin and entered into our world of death and decay and destruction. And I know, for a lot of people, that's not enough. I mean, I know people wonder why God didn't just enter the world and through Jesus clean up all of the messes and remove the Herods of the world and make sure that accidents don't happen. That would have been neat and clean. But it appears that God had a better idea. God decided to come upon us and to come into us at the moment in which we need God the most. Jesus being born into this messy world is a way for God to say, I am with you. I am committed to you. I will never leave you. And maybe for God to be so committed to us, just maybe then redemptive, hope-filled, life-giving experiences happen. to the child dying of starvation in South Sudan, I am with you. I am committed to you. To the endless reports of victims of terrorism, I am with you. I am committed to you. To the Wagner family and anyone who suffers the loss of someone that they love, I am with you. I am committed to you. A baby lying in a messy manger is God's way of saying that God will have the last word. Jesus came upon the scene to do his redemptive work, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. The star that the Magi followed that brought the story of Jesus' birth into the reality of a fallen and messy world is a star that remains above each and every one of us. May that star be a beacon for you, for me, to discover that Jesus Christ is the only hope for the world and the means by which Christ desires to redeem the world one person at a time, beginning with pagan magicians and including you and me. Amen. We sing that heretical song, We Three Kings of Orient are. And as we do, if you have spiritual needs cards, we hand those into the ushers. Please rise.